That was on your tape.
Oh, wow.
But we're like halfway through yours.
We'll take one.
Okay, I'm rolling.
Oh, you're rolling?
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay, Grandma.
Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, that's no.
Your
Tell
family growing
me about your mom.
oh, okay. My mom was a very fastidious lady. She had, she always had to put her best foot forward. Didn't want people to think that she wasn't always fixed up, with her hair always in place. The first thing she did in the morning was get her makeup on, and her hair was always combed nicely, and in her later years always her teeth were in and in place. I used to aggravate her to death. She said, "You always want to put your worst foot forward." And I said, "Well, if they see me the way I am ordinarily, and they like me, then they're always my friends." But I'm just the opposite. I always like to be a mess. But at night, she would spend hours, it seemed like, brushing her hair. It was beautiful, and it was very fine but very thick. And she would sit and brush that hair and then braid it and everything, and put creams on her face and everything, and it paid off, because when she was in her 80s, her skin was just still beautiful, like a baby. And she used to get after me, "You're gonna be sorry," because I didn't like to wear a hat or anything. When she would go out any place, she always had gloves and her hat, and she always protected her skin from the sun so that she'd stay good looking. And she had a lovely voice. It was contralto, and I loved to hear her voice, but I didn't like the songs she chose because they were always so sad. And she was a melancholy person, and she could laugh once in a while, but it wasn't too often.
What happened that made her so melancholy?
Well, she was raised by a dad who was very. He had a terrible temper, and his children were taught to work from the time they were in diapers. My mother had one brother older than she was, and when Grandpa was building this home, it turned out to be like a castle. It was a lovely home, but he had to clear the land, and he did all of the things that they did in pioneer days, But my mother's first work that she did, she was still just tiny, just a baby, and and Grandma said, "Oh, Will, she's just a baby." He says, "There's little weeds for little hands." And so she worked hard, and just like a man on that farm, and it prospered. But his kids were like slaves. They weren't. They were just there to work. And it was such a contrast to what his nature seemed to be to other people, because he had a beautiful voice and played the guitar. It was a special guitar, and he ran a dance hall, and he was always, he'd come in from work, and first thing he did was go in and get cleaned up. And my mother said he always smelled like a flower garden. But when she was 17 years old, there was one time when a couple of neighbor kids came up to get some eggs and things. You know, they did things in those days, swapped foods and things, and they had come for some eggs and a couple of things. They were heading for home, going down the road, and my mother was out in the yard, and they talked for a little while. She followed them along to the corner of their property. She was inside the fence and everything. She just walked to the corner of the fence. And when she came into the house, Grandpa was mad at her for evidently wasting time or whatever he thought. And he hit her alongside the head. She thought he'd broken an eardrum. And so she left home. And she was very close to her brothers and sisters. And once she left, he wouldn't allow them to contact her or her to contact them. He wouldn't accept letters, nothing. So she was just out. And but she was always very sad anyway. It was her nature.
Can I interrupt for just a second? Joanne says we need to have the prayer because this food's getting cold, so maybe we get.
Okay. Shall we do that?
And
Yeah.
we'll finish
And then we'll
this later.
start it up and then we do.
Yeah.
Okie dokie.
Alright.
Thank you. Are you still taking picture?
Yes.
I got my worst foot forward.
But they kind of took over all school pictures. So they had retired, so he was in debt by that time.
That old home teacher that used to bring me C's candy hasn't been my teacher for a long time. He had a kidney removed and a replacement, and has just really been sick. So he hasn't been a home teacher for a while. And when I started getting skinny, he came up to the window there at the library, and he said, "You're getting skinny. What's the matter with you? Who's your home teacher?" So he was really concerned, but there was no need to worry.
Was that during the period when the hormones weren't there?
No, I was just not able to
Having trouble
eat
digesting?
like I would like to.
Well, tell me about your dad now.
Now, my dad, he was a fun guy. Some neat things happened to him when he was a little kid. There was once that he crossed the canal that ran right past their place. And he got out on the footbridge, and he was just a little kid, and he slipped, fell into the water. Well, it took him downstream, I imagine about a block and a half, before it went under a bridge. And this was a road bridge. On the other side of the bridge was a great vacancy. There were no willows or anything. And my dad said that there was a man standing in the middle of the canal, and he said he was an old man because he had white hair. And he was surprised at the strength of that man. The man pulled him right up out of the water and took him over to the shore, and as soon as he was able to breathe and was okay, he was going to thank him, and the man was nowhere in sight. And he couldn't have walked away and not be seen unless it was someone special. So he went in and told his mother what had happened, and she said that was one of the 3 Nephites. So we feel like that was true. But Daddy was full of a lot of fun, and I understand he was a very good dancer as a young person. He met, the first time he saw my mother, he just saw her back, but she had her hair down. And he loved that hair when he first saw her. He says, I'm going to marry that girl, and he up and did it after sometime later. But I know that he loved to run and race, and there was one time that there was a race professionals, and Grandpa, my dad's father, was back in the crowd, and he couldn't see the racers, but he saw this one head that bouncing along, running, and he had come in after the race had started, and he just passed them all up. And come to find out, it was his own son. It was my dad. So he was real fast on his feet. But loved to dance. But a horse fell on him when he was a young man. It was in this wintertime, and the horse slipped and fell and crushed one foot really bad. So he was always crippled. They said that when he got into a dance hall, even as crippled as he was, you'd never know it when he'd dance. And it was really wonderful. But he always had a lot of friends around. He was a mechanic, and they said at that time he was an expert. Well, during the war, he was drafted to go to the coast. He couldn't be in the service, but he was drafted to go to the coast and fix machinery for boats and all kinds of things during the war. And we lived in Seattle and Portland and San Francisco. But he was like my brother Burgess is now, just full of fun, and he loved to sing crazy songs. And that was what I enjoyed with him. We sang together a lot, and we got so we could even harmonize. Before he died, I was 10 when he died. But just full of fun all the time. He also did beautiful painting. He didn't consider himself an artist, but I know the Orpheum Theater in Twin Falls, he did some beautiful painting. You know how they decorated theaters in those days. And I was always real proud of that. I have lots of good memories of Dad and his funny ways.
What was it like for you growing up?
When I was little, I had a good life till I was 10. Except for one thing. My mother was so proper. I don't know how many times she says, I'm going to make a lady out of you yet, because I was a tomboy. And I was the oldest one in the family. But she always dressed me in straight dresses. If I ever had a belt, it had to go down around my hips. my little girlfriends had belts came around their waist where they belonged, and some of them had little dresses and panties to match. And I hated those black bloomers. She put cuffs around below my knee, but I could hardly pull up over my knee. I did sometimes, but it was murder. But I thought one time that I would get her so that she would get me some overalls or rompers or whatever so that I could climb, because I love to climb trees. And I like to run away. But after I got a little older, I climbed a tree, hung by my knees right out in front of, well, we were almost, we were kind of cattywampus across from the City Hall courthouse. And so I chose that tree to hang by my knees, and I let all my clothes fall off but my black bloomers. And all it got for me was a good hard licking. My mother had a strap made out of a tug. A tug is, I guess, I don't know if you know what a tug is, but it's one of those straps that goes alongside of a horse when they're harnessed to a wagon. And she could raise welts on you, 1/4 of an inch high. So that's what I got for trying to show off. But I'll have to tell you one more thing Daddy pulled on Grandma. Grandma Howard was very religious. And of course my dad and mother didn't attend church or anything. They both knew it was true, but they just didn't bother to go. So it was right after the war, and it was before Burgess was born, so I couldn't have been more than about 2 years old, maybe close to 3, but about 2. And Grandma had family home evening. We were there for a visit. We lived in Twin Falls, but we were there for a visit at Christmas time. And or I suppose it was Christmas. Anyway, we get through the family home evening, and the other cousins and different ones had taken part, and Grandma had given a lesson and whatever, but I said, now, before we go to bed, before we have closing prayer, she said, is there anyone else who has a song or a story or something they would like to do before we close? I hollered, I can sing. So he stood me up on the table, and I sang, little drops of whiskey come trickling down the rocks. They had to have some more program after me, but Daddy did that just to give her a bad time. And and I was always very willing to do whatever Dad liked to do. So, and then I was a runaway. My mother used to have to tie me on the end of a rope to a tree, and if I could get away, I'd be gone again. But so I was a problem. But and down, all in all, it was just a good life. I had some neat experiences. One time, a little girlfriend and I were playing jacks on the front sidewalk, and they'd been talking about the world coming to an end, and us kids had been listening to all of this talk, and while we were playing, we noticed the sky was just black, just away from us, and it was coming our direction. And of course, we wondered if the world was coming to an end, stuff, stuff that was amusing to think of later. But the rain just came down in sheets. It was just pouring down rain. It kept coming toward us and stopped right across the street from us. Just poured over there, and we sat there and watched it. Never got a drop on us. I don't remember so many of the things. I love to skate. I had a nice pair of skates at the courthouse just close by when I got bigger. I'd skate over there a lot because it had big wide steps, and I could just skate along like these kids do now, just go from one step to the other without any problem. I hadn't thought about my childhood for so long. It's difficult to remember everything. But I loved to go hunting with my dad, and I made a good retriever. He'd go pheasant hunting, and he was a good shot. Grandpa, the first time we went hunting with his dad, we called him Grandpa Howard. He shot a rabbit, and it wasn't the best shot. And Grandpa really took that gun away from him, and he wasn't going to go hunting until he could shoot better than that. He wasn't going to let animals suffer. So that's what he did. He learned to shoot really straight, and he'd go pheasant hunting, and he fished. I never went fishing ever. But another thing about him, he'd always have everything cleaned up. Daddy always had everything cleaned up before he brought it home for my mother to work with. And it was very neat. He kept everything in its place. And when he came from work or anything, he'd get cleaned up, and you never saw anything hanging around. I mean, he didn't throw clothes around like so many men. He always left the bathroom clean.
My kids wouldn't know what you're talking about.
No, they wouldn't.
Well, it's interesting. He just kept everything clean. When he took off a suit, he would hang it up on a hanger, and he just was not a messy person. My brothers are that way too.
How many brothers do you have?
Two.
Yeah.
And Virgil was killed in an auto accident. He was in he was over in China and flew the hump all the time that the war was going on. And he couldn't fly a plane because he was colorblind, but he was a navigator, and went through all that and comes home and gets married and had 3 little boys and got killed in an auto accident. So, once Daddy died, we should have stayed in Twin Falls. We'd have been much better off, but we went up to Idaho to be with, we were already in Idaho. We went up to St. Anthony, and my mother worked, and I was in charge of the little boys with no authority. You just didn't get after Burgess for anything, because she just was very protective of him. My parents were very partial. My dad was partial to me. My mother was partial to the boys, but especially Burgess. And so it really showed after, once Daddy died. I I didn't have anybody to be partial to. And then in the next year, my mother married again, and from then on, it was pretty much a hell on earth.
That's when it was really tough. When you were 11 years old?
When she married Southworth.
Yeah, and that's when it was really rough.
Yeah. I stayed out of the house as much as possible, and people in the church thought he was such a nice man, but he was a wicked, bad man. And I spent many, many hours up in the hills. Whenever I was free from work, I was up there. And I worked out for other people, and I'd stay with them when while I was working for them. Generally, I'd stay with them, and they feed you and give you a place to sleep, and you just didn't earn money. You just, it
That
was.
was the Depression years, right?
Mhm.
The Depression years.
Yeah, if I worked a job where I wasn't staying with them, they'd either give me some meals or some old clothes and stuff like that. There was one lady that I worked for. I stayed with the Omans for a long time, but they were bootleggers. And that was an interesting life there too. I was supposed to watch the two little girls and keep the house clean and stuff like that. And Bertha loved to cook, so I always had plenty of dishes and things like that to do. But I loved it when she would go out at night and I'd have the finishing touches to do on the house, and we had hardwood floors, and I could go to bed. I slept upstairs when Elmer was gone, and look over the floors. I'd get over and polish them good before I went to bed, and the moonlight would come in and shine on those floors in the kitchen and living room. But there was one time that Elmer came home unexpectedly. He was a fireman on the railroad. And he came home unexpectedly, and she had already gone out with friends. And he said, I was already in bed. And he went to the dresser and took out a gun. I found out later it was a German Luger. And I asked him not to take the gun. I didn't know what he was thinking about. And he told me not to worry about anything. But he said, I won't do anything foolish. But his wife came home that night with two guys, and he took them into the house at gunpoint. Well, he told me when he left, he said, I want you to go down to your room. You stay there, because I slept in the basement. And said, don't you come up for anything except when I call you. So I went down there, and I kept looking out the window, out of the basement window, to see what might be going on. And he took them into the house at gunpoint and called the police and had the men arrested. He was going to arrest all of them, but she was screaming and crying, and so he didn't turn her in. But she ended up trying to commit suicide. She drank Lysol, and that busted up my happy home, because he took the children and took them to Twin Falls, and she was in the hospital for a long time. She just burned her insides out. It's a wonder she lived, but
to
couldn't.
school?
Hmm?
Did you go to school?
Um, I went to grade school. The 7th and 8th grades, they were fun, except I had one music teacher that wanted me to be in the glee club, and I didn't have a skirt and blouse that you're supposed to wear, and I wouldn't ask my folks for anything, and I didn't have it, so I just told them I couldn't be in it, and she was a ornery thing with me for 2 years there, but one fun thing happened at the end of the 8th grade. For some reason, they wanted us kids out of the schoolhouse. And there was a big hill, I guess about a half mile away from our house, that I loved to run to the top of and run down and stuff. I was doing that regularly. Well, that day, they told us kids to run to the top of that hill and back. Well, between the hill and where we were, there was a canal. So all of the kids had to go to the footbridge or the bridge that went over the road. I knew a place where I could jump the canal. So I just made a beeline for that and jumped and went on up to the top of the hill, and I was there a long time before even the fastest boys got up there. And so when we went to run back, I did the same thing again, and oh boy, I had a real name for being swift. And it stood me in good stead later on, because before high school, I didn't have money to go to high school and stuff either, so I heard about a walkathon. I'd have no problem with a walkathon, because I love to walk and run, and I hardly needed any sleep. So I joined up. Nobody questioned me. I didn't realize you were supposed to be 18, but I joined and nobody questioned me, so things went along fine there for a while. I had frozen my legs at one time or another. I didn't know that was the problem, but they were numb, but they'd hurt. It's crazy how you can be so numb and hurt all the time. And those trainers, they called them, that were supposed to keep track of the health problems and stuff, they were always taking me off the floor and rubbing my legs and feet. That was neat. And then there was one time I was walking up close to the band that played for entertainment every night, and this was in the afternoon. They were just jamming and stuff, and I started singing the music that they were playing. So they called me up and let me stand there and sing several numbers with them, and then they asked me if I would make a list of all the songs that I knew. Golly, I went, you stood up all the time, so I went over to that tall table and wrote, I don't know, many numbers, that I was saying. So they started a request program, and people would call in for requests, and I'd sing with that band, and they were just wonderful. I mean, they could play anything, anybody could. They could transpose music for any person that sang. So became pretty popular with that. And Southworth started, I don't know who he told that I was his daughter. And I sure was his daughter. I was that damn thing. He wouldn't say my name if he could get by with it. And that was what he called me, that damn thing. So I said, that is not my name. I'm not adopted. He's a stepdad, and I tried to get him to erase that part of it. And so they called me Hilda Howard Southworth. Well, my mother didn't like the sound of that, so she pulled me out. But by that time, I had money from silver, little change showers that they give you if you did anything on their entertainment time. And then, I don't know, the railroad men gave me a nice coat, and just different neat things had happened. So I go to school, and I was 6 weeks late getting there, and they wanted me in the Glee Club. Well, I told them I couldn't do that because I figured that you'd have to have a uniform or something. But Mr. Schnabel said no. He said, anything that you need here, the school takes care of it. So I got into the Glee Club. I was starting, and the dean of girls said, that can't be. You have to be in school earlier than that. And the kids went to bat for me, and they just pestered her till she gave in. She said if I could, she'd give me 3 weeks to have my grades up to a certain point. They tested me, and I was only concerned about history. I never liked history. So I went to the history teacher and told her that I was really concerned about being tested in history because I hated it. she said, don't worry, you'll get along fine. She says, I'll work with you. So she did, and all my grades were fine, and I got a lot of good experience in music there. And I had a girlfriend. All of my friends were much older than I was. This girlfriend was, she had to be 7 or 8 years older than me. And she played for the music department. And she had one horrible disposition. Nobody could get along with her, but I did. And so her parents liked to have me come and stay with them as much as I could. So that was another good place to be, except they were bootleggers also. And I just went to school and had a real good time, accepting I worked a lot with I worked a lot with the other people in the music department, when we started the musical. And it was made public that this was not a no. This was not, what do you call them? An operetta. They said this was a musical. Well, it was Shogun. And so I would just, I knew all of the songs and everything, and I was hoping that I might be in the girls' chorus, They put me in as the lead role. Surprised the life out of me, and the girl that really expected, she was an upperclassman, and she jumped up from the auditorium and ran out crying. And I ran out and tried to console her and everything. Mr. Snobbles, before he told us who it would be, he said, now for the lead. He says, I know that Jerry could probably act a lot better than Hilda, but he said, in a musical, he said the voice is more important, so they had chosen me. So that was a fun time too. And our school really got out of debt with that musical. We had been in debt, and I guess it was threatening the orchestra and band and stuff like that. So we were really fortunate, but I didn't get a yearbook, and found out that was the one yearbook that everybody bought that could, and later on my kids tried to get one for me. It was the only yearbook for years and years that they didn't have one because they were all sold out. So that was, I don't know if I'm rambling too much or.
No, it's perfect.
No, you're rambling